Okay, so welcome for the last session of Friday WPCampus. So did everybody have a good day?
Yeah.
Woo! Okay, so he basically could completely bomb it, and you got your ticket price.
Hopefully that won't happen.
So Mitch Canter is here from Vanderbilt University, and he's going to talk to us about how to level up our security and make sure that the people we don't want on our site are not going to be on our site. So take it away, Mitch.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Good.
Nice. I'm going to talk loud to make sure that the people out in cyberspace can hear us as well. So since this is the last session of the day, I want you guys to help me out with something. Can you do that? I want you guys on the count of 3 to cheer really loud so that we can make everybody else in the other sessions make them think that they're having way less fun than we are. Can we do that? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Go. You hear how much fun we're having? I mean, it's so great. I'll be here all week. Well, now that that's out of the way, who am I and why should you even care of what I have to say? My name's Mitch Canter. I've been with Vanderbilt University for only a year, but before that I was 10 years freelancer. I've done everything with WordPress from I've been working with WordPress since it wasn't fun. There were no themes, there were no plugins. It was just, hey, it was there. I've committed patches to core. I've eaten, slept, and breathed WordPress. But now I work for Vanderbilt Communications. We have about 2,600 WordPress sites scattered over 2 multi-sites. We have a lot of other single instance WordPress sites that we're slowly absorbing into the blob. But we want to, we're definitely trying to get as much of it condensed under one roof as we can. So I call this Level Up Your WordPress Site, but my other fun name for this is called Security Quest. So a lot of us in the room are nerds. I would think so at this point in our lives. And one of the things that I like to do in my spare time, I play video games with my kids. I play Minecraft with them. But I also like to play some of the more modern role-playing games, MMOs, right? And one of the things that I got to thinking about as I was playing and thinking about what I wanted to talk about with this session is that playing those games and security, they kind of go hand in hand. For MMOs, for example, a lot of times it's, what's called a logarithmic expansion. You get to level 30 really, really quickly, and then it takes just as long to get to level 40. And then it takes just as long to get to level 45, and then 46, and then 47. So it ramps up very quickly, and then it kind of trails off at the end. And I think that's what happens a lot with security is we want to set up sort of our base, right? We want to set up our base and then be able to take small increments and build onto that. And that's what I want to do today. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those things, but I want to give you some hard numbers first, just so you know exactly what we're dealing with in the security world. So 30,000 number of websites that are hacked per day. And this is actually an old number. This was pulled from a study that Securita did, and I'll talk about Security later on. But this was back in 2016. There were 30,000 websites per day that had reported some sort of malware or backdoor or virus or something that was letting unauthorized users either mess with or access their content. Of those, 78% of them were built on the WordPress CMS. And I'll talk about this more later as to why that's the case. Obviously, we're here because this is a WordPress conference. There are other content management systems that get hit, for sure. But this number is important because at the end of the day, it's not a matter of if you're going to be hacked, it's when, a lot of times. There really is no secret sauce because for every countermeasure that we develop in the security field, the hackers get that much more smarter. And it really is just a tick for tack, They do something, we prevent it from happening again. They find a new avenue. Everything's good for a while. WordPress updates. It all happens all over again. With every update comes the new introduction of possible security holes. With every plugin you install, it ups the ante even more. And of course, we want to be able to use all of that, but still mitigate the amount of problems that we have from a security standpoint. Our goal with security we have a couple of goals really, but our main goal is to reduce the risk that we have, to take the chance away from the hackers, from the exploiters that get into our system. And we want to be proactive about it, because if we're being reactive, that means the attack has already happened, and instead of doing protection, we're doing cleanup, which I think personally, cleanup takes so much longer than trying to prevent the problem in the first place. How many of you ever actually have had to clean up a hacked website? How many of you have had to clean up the same hacked website more than once? How many of you will swear that it's not your fault that happened? No, I'm just kidding. We've all been there, right? I mean, users are going to use, and for better or for worse, they're the ones that are driving a lot of what happens on the website, because they want plugins. They're the ones that want features, and we as professionals try to give them that. But at the same time, we can't do it, and we can't give the hackers the tools that they need in order to be able to get in and do their dastardly deeds. Okay? So with security, I like to think of this as a three-pronged approach. And I want to take this from three different angles, because A, there's three different places that that hackers could get in. But B, we want to make sure that we're doing what we can on every front in order to be able to protect ourselves from people getting in, messing with our data and messing with our database. So I want to talk about these three different approaches, and then I'm going to try to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. So I want to talk about this from the server standpoint. I want to talk about it from the site standpoint, and then also external resources and tools that we can use to bolster not only our actual protection against hackers, but also just our knowledge base, because the more we learn, the more we can do. We can figure out what the latest vulnerabilities are, and then we can protect against them. I try not to be like a doom and gloom kind of guy. I know a lot of security people are, because, you know, oh my gosh, your website's going to be hacked literally tomorrow. There's a lot of stuff that we can do to protect against that. And so I was thinking again about this and likening it to the games that I play, both with my kids, the games I like to play on my own. And so, you know, I've kind of likened a lot of these security potentials to some of the older like role-playing games. Anybody a fan of those in the room? A couple people, right? So we're thinking like Legend of Zelda, even Minecraft at some point. So if you're not that nerdy, please join us on the dark side and be that nerdy, because it's way more fun. But I'll still I want to try and relate those concepts back to something that everybody can understand. So the first thing I want to talk about is the server. This is the actual spot where our files and our databases are going to live. And I like to think about this in the term of, if you're a really geeky person and did the old Dungeons and Dragons stuff, it's your constitution modifier, it's your health bar, it's the number of heart containers you've picked up. And I liken it to that because in some cases, you can't do anything about this, okay? This may be something that you as a front-end developer have no control over, but it's good to know, A, that these exist, and B, it's good for something that you can bring up to your IT department. If you know what to look for, you can say, hey, maybe this is what's happening. Maybe this is something that we need to look at. And like that, your constitution modifier in D&D, you can't really change it very much. It's something that's set ahead of time, and as you progress, you can do small changes to it, but it's not something that can be changed easily. But hey, if you have the control to be able to do so, if you are a server admin or a sysadmin, then this is absolutely a great first place to start, okay? And like I said, a lot of this may be really entry-level information for some people. I want to make sure that everybody kind of gets on the same page, and that way we build up from there, because some people might be missing that one key crucial piece of information that maybe you didn't realize was even a thing, you know? That said, hopefully, unless we're more on the user or the content side, hopefully we've all heard of an SSH key, okay? And an SSH key is, what it is it uses cryptography, and it's a key value pair. One is put on our computer, one is put on the server, and when we try to authenticate with the server, those two are matched up. Obviously, this is a very high-level explanation, but it allows those two keys to talk to each other to give yourself access to whatever it is that you might be trying to do. For every sort of server access that we want to do, if we're copying files, if we have to copy over to a main server, hopefully there's another method of putting files there, a deployment method instead. But this gives us the ability to A, authenticate without a passkey, and B, it locks down our access to only be accessible from one device, probably your laptop or your desktop station. So with SSH keys, we want to have our access limited, and I'll talk about this more in depth later. But at the same time, we want to be able to run our server infrastructure in what's called an isolated execution environment. Okay, this is a really fancy way of saying, and I think the AWS talk hit on this earlier. If you happen to be in that, we want to be able to run our files on one server. We want to run our database on another server, and what this is going to do is it's going to limit the ability of a hacker to do certain attacks on certain servers. Somebody that's trying to do a SQL injection, okay, where they're actually trying to inject database code to run, it's going to be very difficult to do if you can't allow files to run, because that involves them actually getting into a file, copying the code they need, and running that code on the server. Well, if the database server doesn't allow files to be run because it's just a database server, that limits that vector of attack, okay? Just for your kind of viewing pleasure to see the differences between them, you know, a typical web server that's like a hosted server might have the database and the files and everything on one piece of architecture. But with an isolated environment, it's something where your files are hosted on one, your database is hosted on another. They're allowed to talk to each other, but even that access between the two servers is limited to the point where an attacker has to have very specific credentials in order to be able to get in and do damage. They can't usually do damage from the outside, which is what we want. We want to limit outside interference, but still give the servers enough leeway to be able to do what they need to between each other. The load balancing and the firewalls that were talked about with AWS too, that has a lot to do with this as well. What we want to do is we want to shield the outside from the different, we want to cut off different services to be accessible from the outside, but limit those to only be accessible from the inside. Obviously, this is a very wonderful MS Paint drawing that I did that simulates this fact. We all kind of know a little bit about what a firewall does, okay? But a lot of people don't realize that firewalls can be either hardware, it's either a literal piece of server that sits between the code that you're accessing and your computer itself, or it can be software. And there are software firewalls that you can run. The most generic of them, one that's kind of included with most installs, is IPTABLES. There's also UFW firewall. If you were in the AWS install, they have their own firewall that you can run. But it's basically, and I could spend all day talking about how to set them all up and all that. I want to try and keep this as high level as I can. But these terms are these are something that you can install and run and activate on servers to be able to protect. You know, different. You can have it block IPs by a certain range. You can say, well, okay, we're getting a lot of robots coming in from this specific range of IP addresses, and you can go into IPTables and say, I want to just completely block off that. And if somebody from that IP range tries to access the website, they're automatically turned away, no questions. So it gives you the flexibility to be able to look at your logs, see what traffic is coming in, see if it's actually something that you can do, you know, if it's actual web traffic, and if it's not, to be able to deal with and mitigate the damage before it gets worse. So with firewalls, there are two different schools of thought. There's inclusive and exclusive. Inclusive firewalls allow everything, but then ban certain things as they come up. That's, once again, if you're allowing all outside traffic, but then you get a certain maybe the Russian, Chinese, whatever these hackers are. If you get them coming in and you see it coming from a certain IP range, you block that range. Exclusive is where you ban everything and then give people access. It's like the bouncer at the bar. You can get in, you can get in, you can't get in, you can get in, you can't get in, you know? And being exclusive means that everything is more tightly organized and more tightly constrained. But it also means that there's if you have a lot of external services you have to whitelist to give access, it's more time that's being taken in order to do that. Both of them have their pros and cons. The best thing the best one of the two is honestly what works best for you and what works best for your organization and your setup. As far as the safest, I would say it's exclusive because you're only letting what access in that you want, but sometimes that's just not feasible. So inclusive, banning what you can before it happens is a good second best. Should be without saying, this has been a great debate that has raged along through the eons of what your file permissions should be set to. If you haven't checked your file permissions in a while, this is your friendly wake-up call to go do so. Sometimes it's one of those things where you set it and you forget it and you don't go back and look at it, and then one day you wake up and somebody has set a file folder to 777 and everybody's just going nuts uploading stuff. Not that I've seen that happen in firsthand, and not that it was my fault. But you always want to restrict your file permissions to the lowest that you absolutely can, and then relax from there as you need to, okay? Once again, this is hotly debated, but I did a lot of searching, a lot of researching. I found that most people, once again, your mileage may vary, most people set their files to 644 and their folders to 755. If this is absolutely great to you, the files are being able to be read and written to by the user, but nobody else. And the folders, read and executed by everybody, but sorry, let me back up. Let me try that again, shall I? The files can be read and executed only by the user of the server and nobody else. The folders can be uploaded to, read, and executed by anybody, by the user, but then only allowed to be read by other people. And that's what those numbers mean. It's a combination of digits that give permissions to either the user, the group, or to everyone. And once again, if you're not a sysadministrator, you may be looking at me like, group, what does that mean? It's just a collection of users that are in a Linux or a web server install. 9 times out of 10, this is going to work until it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you relax the permissions and allow more. Hopefully you're not having to go up to 777, which lets anybody read and write and do anything. That is a problem that you need to address instead of giving people that access, because you're opening up your web server to be able to allow somebody from the outside to upload whatever files and execute whatever files that they need to. Any questions on the server stuff? Like I said, I'm kind of blazing through a lot of these, but I know a lot of people in here aren't sysadmins. So I wanted to at least kind of cover the hot topics there. And I know more people are going to be interested in the site-specific stuff because that's what you're going to have more control over. Yes, quick question.
Does inclusive firewalling then imply that you're doing more you're reacting?
It is a lot more reactive. And I mean, there are kind of blacklists that are already available. And so you can import known problem areas, like import known IP ranges that are used to cause trouble. So that makes it a little bit less reactive, but you are absolutely right. The question was, is inclusive more reactive than proactive for firewalls? And it absolutely is, because you are doing stuff as the problems arise. There are other services called, I think one's called fail to ban, where if it notices activity happening on the fly, it will add their IP addresses to banned list. It will add user accounts to banned list. It's fail #2 ban. But once again, that's something that has to be set up on the server, and you can give it some parameters to follow. You have to be careful with that too, because you can lock yourself out. Once again, not that I've ever done that, but here we are. So, hey, I'm human, right? I've made every mistake in the book. Okay, so let's move on from the server. Okay, this is more of the site. So if the server is your internal and inherent abilities, this is the equipment, right? This is your armor. This is your equipment. This is the shields. This is things that you can bring on to offset and augment yourself to fight against hackers. And this is something that most of us probably have a lot more control over than the server. A lot of us probably can't do server-side stuff. Maybe we're not sysadmins. Maybe the IT department slaps our hand when we try to do stuff like that. But that's what happens. With this, it's more on the plugins, the files you run, everything of that nature, okay? First and foremost, please, 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 please keep your WordPress up to date. It's that important. I'm going to say it again. Please Keep your WordPress up to date, because 56% of all hacked websites on WordPress were because of either an out-of-date plugin or an out-of-date core install, okay? This should be the #1 priority in security, is trying to keep a WordPress site updated. And I know it's really hard, because WordPress is really, really good about releasing updates every week, it seems like. It's really not that close together, but it seems like there's a security patch or a new update coming out, and I know that causes problems, once again, on the server side for people that like to keep their code bases intact. But in reality, the fact that they release patches that far together is a good thing. It means that there's thousands of eyeballs looking at code, and when something as vicious as what's called a zero-day vulnerability, something that a hacker could use to instigate problems that day, that means that somebody's usually patched it within 2 hours, okay? So if you see a security update come out that says it's patched a zero-day vulnerability, do everything in your power to stop what you're doing and update, because that's going to be something that will protect you not only in the long term, but even in the short term. So if you've done anything in WordPress for the last couple of years, these plugins may look familiar to you, or these scripts, okay? So out of all of the websites, 75% of hacked plugins fall under one of these 3 plugins. Tim Thumb, especially more 3 or 4 years ago, was a big deal because hackers were using the resizing script with what's called a SQL injection. They were injecting code into that plugin to be resized as an image, but instead it was actually running the code and causing a lot of problems. Even now today, there are still instances of WordPress that are running outdated Tim Thumb code that still get hacked. Rev Slider is another one. So it's a slider plugin. It lets you upload images that rotate around on a slider. And Gravity Forms. Obviously, you're dealing with a lot of code submission and user data. There's a lot of avenues that people can get into site through that. Just as an aside, anybody ever heard of the Panama Papers? It was in the news like about a year ago. Rev Slider. That's how they got all of the data out, was a hacked WordPress plugin. So it can happen to anybody. Okay, which brings us into plugin audits. I mean, we have to sit and look at our website every so often and go, I mean, do I really need like a 5th version of Hello Dolly? I mean, it's a great plugin, but I mean, do we really need it on the site? Do we really need 4 plugins that do sliders because 4 different departments want 4 different sliders? Is this real to anybody? Or okay, yeah, everybody. It's like, oh my gosh, you're speaking my language, right? We have to sit down and we have to look. Are there ways that we can streamline? Can we take 4 plugins and get one really, really good one that's secure and use it instead? You know, do we absolutely, this one plugin is being used on this one site. Does it have to be there? And sometimes the answer is yes, because that's what the chancellor likes, and we're okay with that, you know? We've all been there. But the question is, if there's any point in time that we can trim out plugins or trim out anything that causes a problem, we do so. We prune the branches, and we're allowed to then grow bigger because we've gotten rid of the dead weight. 2-factor authentication. I'm going to come back to plugins in a little bit, but 2-factor authentication, just kind of going to a different direction. I was really sad when I found out that Clef was being shut down. Anybody ever heard Clef? It was really cool. It lets you hold up your phone and you scan the barcode on your camera and it like logs you in. It was the coolest 2-factor authentication I've ever seen. And of course, they shelved it because as all good things are, they come to an end. So 2-factor authentication, for those of you who don't know, it's allowing yourself to be authenticated by multiple layers. And I've got on here knowledge, possession, and inherence. Knowledge, it means that you're allowed in because you know something. Possession, you're able to log in because you have something. Or inherence, you're able to log in because you are something, okay? Retina scans would fall under inherence because you are your eye is very unique to you, so that's who you are. Possession, anybody have a little dongle that they use to log into their bank or to a VPN? That's possession 2-factor authentication. Knowledge 2-factor authentication. Even logging in with your password and some other keyword or some other like unique passcode, that would be 2-factor. It's not like true 2-factor, but it allows you to you know something else. So that's how you're allowed to get in. I'm going to cover, this one's kind of specific to WordPress, so I've added the code down here to be able to do it. XML-RPC limitations. This is a really fancy way of saying that someone can use XML over HTTP to do stuff to your website. Anybody in here still use Windows Live Writer to update? Yeah, nobody does. Okay, get rid of that. No, you don't need it. I liked Windows Live Writer for a long time, and then I got a Mac. But yeah, so add filter, XML-RPC enabled, we want to return that as false. What this does is this disables it on the back end. If you have need for it, obviously you have to keep it up, but this is a way that attackers can get in, if you're not careful, to post content to your website without your permission. Question in the back. Because for a long time, I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but WordPress.com, do you guys remember Microsoft's blog platform that they had probably 3 or 4 years ago? Microsoft actually had a blogging software that they used that was kind of internal, and they actually got rid of it and transferred all of their users over to WordPress.com, which doubled the WordPress.com user base. Of course, a lot of those people were used to using software like Windows Live Writer or there's another one. I can't remember the name of it right now. It was a Mac-based one. They were using it because my Live Writer at the time was included in the Office suite, you know? And about that time is when they started to turn on, this is obviously, you know, correlation is not causation, but it was right about the same time that they included this on by default and then removed the option to get rid of it. And I think it was just ease of use for those users coming over. I could be totally wrong on that. That's my opinion. That said, the WordPress app doesn't even use this anymore. It actually uses true authentication. It logs you in, etc. So at this point, unless you know you need it, there's no reason to have it on. And if you know you need it, you've probably taken steps to secure it otherwise. Okay?
Question on it.
Answer.
So if you're running a multi-site network with many sites and networks, where's the best place to put that? Put it on functions?
You would put it in what's called a site-specific plugin, or in this case, a network-specific plugin, and you would put it under your must-use plugins, and it would run on everywhere. So, but which I think a lot of us run multi-sites, right? We have 2 at Vanderbilt. Some people said they had 6 or 7. The network-specific plugins are good to run code over all of the different sites, and it allows you to run that one filter throughout your entire install. So. The question was, where should you put a plugin to be able to put the filter in? A site-specific plugin in the must-use folder is a good place to put that. Question?
It's not really a question, it's a comment.
Yes.
We've actually been DDoS'd against XML-RPC.php. So in my IPTables, I actually block the file name.
That's a great way to do it. He said that they've had DDoS attacks through this particular file name. And there are actually a lot of ways that you can block access to this. This is the WordPress way to do it with a filter. Your way to do it through IPTables, blocking that file name. If you're on Apache, you can do it through your htaccess file and disallow access. You can do it through an Nginx configuration file. Multiple ways to do it, but you're absolutely right. That's the more you can do to, you know, whichever one works for your server setup is the best way to do it. But that's a really good point. Thanks. I talked to somebody today that said they actually ran across this week. Please do not have a user named admin. If you do this, you're giving hackers 50% of the information they need to be able to get in. Obviously, the other half is the password, and that's definitely a lot less secure than your username would be sometimes. So, but I say that because now is probably a good time to do user audits as well. And you have to look at yourself and go, do I really need this user? And it sounds worse to say, do I really need users? I mean, really? But I go back to say, because users, we have to have them. Users are going to use. But with users, we want to do 2 things. One, we want to make sure that their passwords are secure. Obviously, we can't check their passwords. We shouldn't check their passwords because that is insecure. But we can recommend that users change their password every so often just to make sure that the target is always moving. And the second is to make sure that they have the access they need. And I have a really fun term for this. It's called the concept of least privileged, okay? This means that we want to give only people that need to have access, only the access that they need, and only for the amount of time that they need it. I guarantee you, and I know that every one of us have done it or are currently doing it, we probably have people in our WordPress site that graduated 5 years ago. unless your multi-site hasn't been around that long. But chances are we have users that are long gone from either our faculty, our staff, or our students that have access to edit these. And really, unless you're using some sort of authentication with a third party, Active Directory, LDAP, whatever that is, you have no way of knowing if that's the case. But every now and then, it's a good idea and a good practice to audit your users to make sure that people that have that access still don't have it, or if they don't need it. So, any questions on site-specific stuff? Awesome. There's not a lot of external resources. There's a few, but you know, if we're going back to our gaming analogy, this is the stuff that bubbles us, our shields, our blessings. And I say that is because there's not a lot of them, and they may not work for you in the case that you need it to, but it's a good thing to know that they're out there, especially because a lot of these are more resources that help you protect yourself from ongoing threats once the initial baseline has been laid. Okay. SSL certificates, okay? We all know what they are. It's 2017. We all should be using them for everything that we do. And luckily, there are services that are allowing that to be more and more the case. But it's personally my belief that every site that deals with user data in any sort of fashion needs an SSL certificate. By none, by all means. And if there's any sites out there that don't have them, then that's just making themselves targets at this point for people that would want to snoop in on the data that's being transmitted. I mean, I don't think anybody here would buy from a store that didn't have the little green lock, right? Why would students want to trust us with their user information if we didn't have that little green lock? Why would they want to trust us with their tuition dollars, right? And it may not be something that they even do over the internet, but it's just it's a mental thing. You know, they see that, oh, well, I don't see the, even if it's more of, well, I don't see the green lock, I'm not going to do it. It's, you know, just maybe a feeling of uneasiness. I don't know. It could be anything. But personally, SSL certificates, I think, are something that every site all over the place needs. And if you don't, you know, if you're a small school, maybe you don't have budgets for SSL certificates for every site, let's encrypt. I mean, where else are you going to be able to get a free SSL certificate with no strings attached? I mean, they've come a long way. They're able to actually do wildcard certificates as of 2018. So anybody can use one of their certificates for any number of their sites going forward. There's lots of great tutorials on how to use a Let's Encrypt certificate, not only to be able to install it, but to automate the renewal process so it's something you don't have to ever touch again, which is nice. I mentioned Securi earlier. They do a lot of research. They do a lot of knowledge hunting on security. They specialize in WordPress security. They were recently purchased by GoDaddy, I believe, so they've got a lot of money behind them to be able to keep funding that research, which is great because they do a really good job. I know a lot of them, the guys on staff there, they're super awesome people. They also do have a scanner plugin. I haven't used it recently, so I don't know how resource intensive it is, but if you've got an idea that something might be amiss on your server, maybe you've got malware, maybe you've got some sort of backdoor, the scanner plugin will alert you to whatever vulnerabilities they have. I don't know if they actually themselves involve themselves into de-hacking a website, but I know that they used to actually do the de-hacking for people as well. I don't know if they do that anymore, but the scanner plugin will scan through all your files, your databases, make sure everything's peachy keen and good to go. So. Actually, one of the WPCampus people, Paul Gilzow, he does the vulnerable plugins list. There's only one this week, which I think, like he said, everybody was here, so nobody's really doing anything with it. But yeah, it's a list of plugins that have known vulnerabilities, and he keeps that list up to date every week, and it's posted on the WPCampus website for anybody that wants to view it to do so. Not only does it tell you what plugin it is, but it tells you what vulnerability it is and how to fix it if there's a fix available. So. Super cool resource. Shout out to him because he's on the main WPCampus site. Offsite backups, because it happens. You know what it is too, just in case. Worst case scenario happens, you get hacked. It's always good to have some sort of offsite. That's the key word, because if you put something on the same server, guess what? It's probably hacked too. So you want to make sure you have an offsite method. You can back up to S3. There's, I think, Updraft Plus is a smaller backup. Obviously, if you have lots of sites, that's not nearly going to be scalable. But having some sort of backup, whether it's to Amazon, whether it's to a third-party service, even if you're, I know people that back up their websites to Dropbox. So, I mean, whatever you want to do, however you want to back it up. Obviously, we're in an enterprise level, so it's a lot different. But have some sort of offsite backup system ready to go. Woo! So we covered everything on the server side, we covered everything on the website side, and we covered everything external resources, knowledge enhancers, and all of that other stuff. So that said, we've got about 10 minutes, I think. Hey, what do you know? 10 minutes. Man, I'm good. Are there any questions you guys have? In the back.
Yeah, let's talk proactive for a minute. Because one of the things I look at is the setup of everything is relatively straightforward. Whether it's at the server level, getting IPTABLES, and all that. I've got the back end, HT access protected. I run SSL across everything. I feel confident in my ability to say my site is relatively safe. But I'm also not a hacker. And so I've been looking for like a good or serviceable, at least pen test tool or something that can poke at the things that I just haven't gotten to in all my reading and things of that nature. Do you have any recommendations on that front in terms of something that can go through and automate some of the common attack vectors and test the site for the
Sure. So the question is, are there any services that automate things that hackers might do that you can test against your website to see how well you're doing on your security? I do have them, but I don't have them on hand. I had a list, and what I'll do is I'll tweet that list out later of different services that you can use. Obviously, a lot of them are pay for play, so you pay to the service, and then that gives you access to the tools. There may be a few free ones. I haven't updated my list for that in a while. But there are tools that you can use to automate that to make sure that you're keeping yourself secure. I'll if I can remember tonight, I'll look up that list and I'll tweet out a few of the ones that are recommended. So, any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where I ended up in mitigation of attacks, that nature was a traffic inspection service like Cloudflare.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if you have experience with that or not suggested.
Sure. Load balancing, well, it won't really solve the problem, but it will help on the side where it will manage the traffic while you're trying to fight it off. That said, I know I mentioned, I think, fail to ban, and one of the things that it can do, and there are other softwares that are very similar to it, but one of the things that it does is it checks the traffic, and if it notices 4, 5, 6 different requests coming in a certain time frame from the same IP address, it logs that address, and either it checks it against a whitelist to see if it's actual, I want this to happen. If it's not, it automatically kicks it into the banned IP address list, and then it just gives them an error when they try to access it further. But what you're doing basically is you're using some sort of service to check the traffic coming in, like you said, to check whether it's legit traffic or not. If it's not legit, it kicks it into a queue that gets, that lets it fail out, that way. One of the other things I've noticed too, and there are things that you can do in your HT access or your Nginx config folder. You can, like you was talking about earlier, you can ban certain file names from being accessed. You can ban certain referrers from being accessed. Any of you guys get Google Analytics traffic from like SEO dot something or another? You can include keywords into your traffic and have them automatically fail out so that they don't taint your Google Analytics results. But it's the same concept. If you see certain referrers from other websites even that might be causing an issue, you can ban that that URL, and any referrers coming from that will automatically fail out, and they won't be able to access the site. And it won't even be like that they can ping it but not do anything. They don't even get to ping it at that point. The server completely rejects it. Any other questions? Yes.
So you're talking at very high levels on security. Where can we go to get more resources for nuts and bolts?
Sure. The security website is, like I said, I mentioned them earlier. They're a great resource. They're putting out articles. A lot of the data that I got came from the 2016 report that they put out. And I'll, if I can think about tweeting that out later, I definitely will. But it's basically a PDF that they put out that summarizes what CMSs are being attacked. It's very WordPress friendly because obviously they're a WordPress security company. You know, where are the vectors coming from? What can we do to stop it? Yeah, I think that's kind of their first and foremost. But a lot of times, even sites like WP Beginner, usually if an exploit's found for WordPress, it's usually tweeted out pretty quickly, mainly because WordPress core teams are good about fixing the issue quickly. Now, if it's a plugin, obviously that's a different story. But I know the security team is usually really proactive about getting that information out versus, oh, it happened. Well, here's what happened, you know. Question. Personally, I would just, I mean, if they haven't, if you've noticed that a user hasn't accessed a website, and there are queries that you can run to say, okay, when is this user last logged in, right? You can, there are plugins that do it. Some of them are better than others just because you are running database queries at that point. So it's going to be resource intensive. If you have a lot of users, it might be better to, you know, grab a copy of the database and run it locally so you can modify, you know, see which users you have. But you can run queries against, okay, here's the user, when did the last time they logged in? If it's been a year, why are they still a user? I mean, at that point, because that's, I think for education especially, that's the standard turnaround time for a lot of stuff. It's a calendar year, right? Next semester, next school year, whatever you want to call it. There are, I mean, you know, there are exceptions to that, obviously. If a staff member leaves, they should probably be gotten rid of pretty quickly. Not that people would do malicious things, but it happens, you know. And there should be an offboarding process just as there is an onboarding process. Okay, the staff member left, HR has to do their thing. What does my web ops team need to do in order to make sure this user is gone? We need their SSH keys removed. We need their access to Google Drive removed if you've given it. We need their access to the deployment system to go off. We need them to, you know, in our case, we deactivate their VUNet ID because that's what we use for our authentication. You know, if a user is offboarded, what do we need to do to make sure that they don't have access to the systems? Not that people are inherently bad, but you don't want to take that risk, you know? Other than that, for casual, non-staff, you know, users, I'd say to find out when the last time they accessed the site was, if they needed to. If it's been more than X amount of time, either send them an email to warn them, or if you just want to get rid of them and prune the, you know, rip the Band-Aid off, do it that way. I think we got time for one more question. So.
Mine's a quick comment.
Sure.
Just piggybacking on that idea of getting rid of users. Keep in mind, hacking is not always technical either. So if you've got old users in there and somebody knows that, they pick up the phone, call the person, and say, "Hey, we're deleting your account. We need your username and password." I
could do a whole nother session on social engineering.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, most of the time, it's not a hack per se. It's, oh, somebody was stupid enough to give out their last 4 digits of their social over the phone. All right, I think we got time for one more then.
Yeah, one more.
Oh, it is? I don't know if I have time. I didn't know that was there. How do I get to it? More chat. Hey, what do you know?
Oh, cool.
WordFence and iTheme Security Pro. Thank you, JB Christie and Matthew Bea. Sorry I didn't see your comments earlier. They didn't tell me they would be there. So they work very similarly to the security plugin. There's actually some reviews if you Google the, you know, iTheme Security versus WordFence versus Security. There's reviews that say this plugin does this versus this other plugin that doesn't do this or it does that. A lot of people love WordFence, but I've seen that it's resource intensive at times because it has to make a lot of third-party calls to its API, but that's what makes it good. So if you've got the traffic to be able to handle that, that's the best way to do it. I forgot to copy my custom font over. I'm an idiot. So that's where that goes. But iTheme Security, WordFence Security, pros and cons to each of them. There are articles that kind of break that down, and I wish I had more time to do that because I definitely could, but we're out of time, unfortunately. So if you have questions or concerns, feel free to message me at @thatmitchcanter on Twitter. My presentation is available online. I will tweet that out as well. And then I'm presentation number 660 for the presentation feedback. So thank you all very, very much. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of WP Campus. So thanks for having me.